Hello, and welcome back to the third part in our series where we are trying to write a sermon together without the use of AI. That's right, no robots allowed. Can it be done? We will see. Hey, welcome to Pastor Chats. My name's John. I'm a Reformed Presbyterian pastor in McDonough, Georgia. So in the first part of our series, we talked about choosing a passage. We chose John chapter 14, Gospel of John chapter 14, verses 1 through 6. And in the second video, we talked about reading that passage in the English translations, reading the context, understanding what's going on, reading it in multiple translations. And now today, we're going to do that part that when I get to this part in the week, sometimes it's my favorite part, and sometimes it's just okay. We are going to read in the original language. We're going to read in the original Greek or the original Hebrew, whatever our passage needs us to read. I should say this ahead of time. I had a seminary professor, who would say, when he was teaching us Greek, he would say to us, when you guys get to the point of like reading God's word every week to prepare a sermon and you have to read the language every week, you're going to find some weeks where you look at what you've just read and you're like, oh, what it says in the English translation is what the Greek says. And that's so true. And you should know that. I hope that's not discouraging for you to hear. I think it should be encouraging. We have the blessing of so many English translations. If you're a Sunday school teacher or a Bible teacher and you don't know like the Greek language or the Hebrew, you don't know it that well or anything like that, don't feel discouraged. Listen, if you're just teaching from the NASB or the ESV or something, you're teaching the Word of God, okay? You don't have to know all the nitty-gritty of the Greek in order to be able to teach the Word of God properly. Why do I say that? Because the English translations we have are really good. 99% of the time, what you're reading in the ESV, yeah, that's what the Greek says. We're going to see a little bit of that, actually, when we go through the Greek here in our passage in a minute. Now, I will say this. If you're like, man, I don't have the time to learn the language or anything like that, but are there things that I can go to where I can get some insight into the language, like learn a few things that I could share for Sunday school or Bible study or whatnot? Sure, there are actually. There's good resources. Let me show you a couple here. One is one we talked about in our last video, and that is the NET Bible, okay? The NET Bible. I think you can go online and read it for free. This has thousands and thousands and thousands of translation notes. It even has a note right here in verse 1 about the word believe that we're going to talk about in just a second. It's got so many different notes. They're not difficult to read. You don't have to know the original language to understand them. Another good resource is A.T. Robertson's Word Pictures in the New Testament. This is a great book. It's kind of a classic, really. What A.T. Robertson does is he just picks a Greek word or phrase in every single verse of the New Testament, and he basically like parses the word or defines it or shows like some other places where it's used and stuff like that, and kind of points out why this phrase is important. This Greek phrase or word is important in the verse, in the context. Really, I probably glance at Robertson every single week. Really good resource there. There's also commentaries. There are commentaries that range in technicality. There are some commentaries that are filled with so much Greek that unless you know Greek, you're not going to be able to understand them. This isn't one of those. This is the NIGTC, New International Greek Testament Commentary. I don't have a copy of their John volume. This is my copy of the Epistle of James. Sometimes this might be a little over your head if you don't know any of the language stuff. Some of the verbiage in here, it might be a little difficult to understand. But for the most part, you could get through this. But if you want to step down in technicality, but not down in quality, pick up a commentary like these, okay? A good, solid, middle-of-the-road commentary that gets into the historical, grammatical context And what these kind of commentaries will do is when there's an important Greek word or phrase to understand, kind of like what Robertson does, they will point that out. They'll give you some background, some history, some definition of those words and point that out. So this is a great example. This is D.A. Carson's commentary on the Gospel of John. The whole Pillar New Testament series is really good, but this book is a classic. If you're studying the Gospel of John and you're not reading D.A. Carson, you need to. It's really, really good. Another good example is the Hendriksen Kistemacher commentaries. These will get into the Greek on occasion. Not every commentary is going to get into the Greek. These do when it's necessary. This does a lot more. And then there's commentaries that go even beyond that. So there are helps out there, even if you don't know the language. All right, but we're going to dive into the language, do some defining, do some parsing, looking at some syntax and some context, and trying to learn what we can. So let's dive in here. All right, so I have over here on the right the ESV, the English translation on the left, is our Greek interlinear. If you don't know how this works, every single word of the Greek is at the top. You have the word as it's found in the manuscript, and then under that is the root word. Under that is the parsing of that word. So this is a verb. It's present, passive, imperative, third person singular, right? That's the parsing. Under that is the definition of the root word. And under that is the definition within the verse, within the context. And then under that is a Louw-Nida number. That's a link to a Greek lexicon, a dictionary, basically, that shows you the definition of the word and some other places where the word is used in the Bible, right? So there you go. That's a Greek interlinear. So let's look at this. So we have... the first part of the verse, there's not too much here. You have me tarasesto humon hekardia, right? So negative participle here, changing this verb to be negative. So it's a passive verb. So don't let your hearts, right? That's the subject here. Do not let your hearts, and this is making it negative, so don't let your hearts be troubled. Then we come to the verb believe, pisteo. And the ending of this word, that tau epsilon ending, means that this verb, it's a present active verb, but it's a second person plural. And because it has that ending, that means it's second person plural, and it also means that it could have two different moods. And you'll notice that there's two different parsings here. So this could be in the indicative, or it can be in the imperative. And not only that, but in this verse, and just in this first verse, this verb in the same form is used twice. So you have believe eistontheon in God, kai, and also eis eme pisteuete, and also in me believe, also believe in me. So the question is, how do we translate those two verbs? Should they be indicative? Should they be imperative? Should one be indicative and one be imperative? How do we figure that out? We got to look at context. We got to look at how the word is used throughout the Gospel of John and throughout the Gospels. So I wrote down some notes here to kind of show you how I think through questions like these. First of all, I think the second one, the second believe, is definitely an imperative. Jesus is obviously saying, disciples, believe in me. The question is, in the first one, is he saying, disciples, I know you believe in me, I know you believe in God, you need to also believe in me? Indicative, imperative. Or is Jesus saying, disciples, believe in God, command, also believe in me, imperative, imperative? I think it's the second. I think it's an imperative, imperative. Here's why. If it was an indicative, if Jesus was just saying, guys, I know you believe in God, you believe in God, he's just making a statement, that could be understood as something encouraging, which is, given the context of our passage, that is what Jesus is trying to do. He's trying to be encouraging. The problem is, I did a search of pisteuete throughout all the Gospels, especially the Gospel of John. It's used quite often, but by Jesus, but it's never used in a positive way. Jesus never says positively to the disciples or anyone else, you believe. He uses it in a negative way. He says, you do not believe. Like, because of your sin, or you do not believe. Because of the hardness of heart, you do not believe. And there's some examples here. John 5, John 6, John 8, John 10. I got some examples there. Now, if we were to say this in the imperative, if Jesus is saying, making a command, believe in God, grammatically, that just makes more sense. In the sentence, you have two imperative verbs right next to each other, the same imperative verb right next to each other with a chi conjunction in the middle. That just makes it grammatical sense. But also, here's the linchpin. You go throughout the Gospels, Jesus often uses believe in the imperative with people, even with the disciples, and sometimes even in an encouraging way. So Mark 1:15, repent and believe, command in the gospel. Mark 11:24, believe you have received it. John 12:36, while you have the light, believe in the light. John 14:11, believe me, and later believe on account of the works. So for all those reasons, I would say that, this is an imperative and then an imperative. Believe in God, believe also in me. So he is making two commands here in the first verse. By the way, to my first point about how the English translations tend to be right, I mean, this is what the ESV says. Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. All right, verse 2. En te oikia to patras mu, in my father's house, in the house of my father. Monai palai eisen. There are monai, root word monet, dwelling places or rooms, a many, right? There's the adjective describing monet. So there is a question on this word about whether it's a temporary dwelling place or a permanent dwelling place. And the confusion comes from the King James, actually. So I've got a note here. So when Tyndale was translating this, he chose to use the Latin phrase mancia, and that translates in English into mansions, which is why in the King James, if you learned this as a kid in the King James, it was, in my father's house are many mansions. And maybe that made you scratch your head. Like, it's always made me go like, how do you fit mansions into a house? Right. But that's actually us pushing onto the text a meaning in Old English that wasn't there. Mancia, the reason Tyndale used it is because it just means permanent dwelling place. But mansions, the way we think of it, are these grand, illustrious things. That's not what Tyndale had in mind. And so we probably shouldn't use the word mansion. But Origen, an early church father, he did actually think of Manet here as being a temporary dwelling place, which might have been some Gnosticism creeping in, because Gnostic thought has this idea of like climbing the heavenly ladder, so to speak, moving on from one realm to another sort of idea. So I don't think, obviously Gnosticism, not good, right? So I don't think that is a temporary dwelling place. I think Jesus is actually saying that this is a permanent dwelling place that he is making. An example of this, if you click on the Louw-Nida, it actually gives us another example here. John 14:23 also uses the word mane, and listen to how it's used. If anyone loves me, he will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our home, our mane, with him. So if Jesus is saying earlier in our passage in John 14 that he's making a dwelling place that's temporary, well then why in verse 23 would he say we're going to come, the Father and he will come to us and we make our home with him? Well, does that mean the Father and the Son are only going to temporarily dwell with us? Like, no, they're going to permanently dwell with us. Jesus, it's encouraging to talk about a permanent dwelling place. I wrote down, by the way, a quote here from Robertson. Sometimes I'll write down little quotes from different commentators. He said, "This is the most precious description of heaven from Jesus that we possess." I love that. I think that's so true. This does invoke that idea of a husband making, like, building a house for his wife. And here is Jesus. He's coming to the bride saying, I am making you a permanent dwelling place. Well, you will live with me and the Father forever. That's a beautiful description of heaven. That is what we think of when we think of heaven, isn't it? Another thing in verse 2 is the word haughty. So right here, ide me, ipon on humin. So, but if not, I would have told you. So if it were not true that I were making dwelling places, I would have told you. Haughty, because here's why. Because I'm going away to prepare a place for you. Now, the reason that haughty there is really important, if I hover over it, you'll notice there's a little manuscript note here, a textual critical note. A large number of manuscripts, many of them later manuscripts, lack the word because. Now, the reason this is significant is because when you look at the ESV in verse 2, they don't have the word because translated here. They make it the word that, which doesn't make much sense for haughty. And they also make this a question. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And that is really confusing because nowhere in the Greek is this phrased as a question. There's no subjunctive verbiage used anywhere in verse 2 in the Greek. So this should not be worded as a question. I think the ESV writers did make a mistake here. And I think the reason they did that is because they looked at the word haughty, how it's not used in all of the manuscripts, and they decided, well, then we have to change this whole thing, because if you take haughty out, this doesn't make any sense. So I think a better translation is to accept that haughty should be there, and instead to understand it the way the NASB does. In my Father's house are many dwelling places. If not, I would have told you haughty, because I am going to prepare a place for you. All right, verse 3. Kai ion poiutho kai etiomaiso topan humin. And if I go and prepare a place for you. So topan has been used. This is the second time it's been used now. Topan, I think, is referring back to mane. The dwelling place and the place are the same thing that Jesus is talking about. It's just two different words to describe the same thing. Let's see. Let's jump down to verse 4. Well, actually, hold on a second. Let's see. Actually, there is something else in verse 3. There's a hina that's really, really important. Let's look at that. So if I go and prepare a place for you, Palen, again, erkomai, I will come, kai paralemsomai, that's a version of lambano there. I will receive you, pros emoton, I will receive you to myself. And then we come to a really important little Greek word everyone should know. Hina. Hina. This is a hina clause. This next part of this verse is a hina clause. So that, in order that, hopu, aime, ego, kai, humes, eta. In order that, where I am, ego, where I am, also, hemes, you all, in the plural there, you all may be. So, get what's going on here. This little hina clause is really important. This is saying, if we read it in the English, And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and will take you to myself. This is Jesus talking about him returning. Why is Jesus going to return? What is the purpose? What is the reason? This is why the hina exists in Greek, to say why something was just said. That, here's why, that where I am, you may be also. So this is beautiful. This is beautiful. What is the reason Jesus is leaving to prepare a place and the reason he's going to come back again one day? What is the reason? Is it to squash all of his enemies? That's a reason. Is it to make a big scene? Here it is. It's so that where he is, we may be also. The reason Jesus is going to make a place and for us and coming back to get us is because he wants us to be where he is. That's so beautiful. So beautiful. Robertson puts it this way. He said, heaven for the believer is to be where Jesus is and to be with him forever. Here is Jesus stating his purpose. And I love that with that little hina clause. All right. Hey, let's skip down to verse 5 here to save some time. Legay autoi Thomas is saying to Jesus, Kuye, Lord, uk oidamen, pu hupages. We don't know, negative participle there. We don't know, oida, we don't know, where you're going. So, pos, dunamai, dunametha, tain, hodon, idanai. So how are we able to know the way? How are we able to know? How are we able to know the way? Now, here's what's interesting. Dunamai here is put in the indicative, first person plural, but it could be, even though it's not showing two different parsings here, this actually could be parsed two different ways. You could have this as either middle or passive, which is interesting because what that means is there's two different ways Thomas could be saying this. He could be saying, how can we for ourselves on our own know the way, middle, or he could be saying it this way. How can the way be made known to us? Passive, right? Now, honestly, I'm probably just sometimes you realize these things like, oh, is it in the middle or is it passive? And you realize, why did the translators just keep it very simple? Like, how can we know the way? And they kept it simple because it probably was simple. And I'm probably just complicating things here. Plus, what's beautiful is that in Jesus's answer, either question is answered. How can we ourselves on our own know the way? Well, the way you discover the way is you discover Jesus, because he is the way, right? Or how can the way be made known to us? Well, the way the way of life gets known to us is Jesus. Jesus comes into our life. He's the one that makes it known to us. So either question gets answered in Jesus's next statement. And let's read that last verse here and we'll be done. Legay autoi ha Jesus. And Jesus is the subject here. Jesus, Legay said back to Thomas, Ego I me. Ego I me. Here we go. Here is an I am statement from Jesus. If you don't know, in John's gospel, there are 7 I am statements. And of course, I am that I am is the name that God gave of himself to Moses. And so John is pointing out that Jesus would often employ that ego I me, that I am language about himself to subtly reinforce that he actually is the divine. Jesus is God. So the different examples are John 6, he says, I am the bread of life. John 8, I am the light of the world. John 10, I am the door. John 10:11, I am the good shepherd. John 11, I am the resurrection and the life. John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. We're going to talk about that. John 15:1, I am the true vine, right? So those are the different I am verses. So one of the things we need to note in verse 6 is when Jesus is saying this encouraging thing to Thomas, he is reinforcing that he is God, right? He is employing the name of God here. And then the three things that he says he is, and these are overwhelming, aren't they? To hear that he is all three of these things. He is the way, hadas, right? He is the truth. Now, by the way, when we look at this in the Greek here, ego eimi he hadas. There's the article meaning the. He hadas. I am the way. Kai he aletheia. I am the truth. Kai he zoe. And the life, right? He is saying he is the epitome of these things. By saying he's the truth, that means he's the reality, right? He, to say something is the truth, that's often used in connection with God's revelation. Remember at the beginning of John's gospel, John chapter 1, what does John say about Jesus? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Jesus is the revelation of God. And here, Jesus is putting it in this way. I am the truth. I am the reality, the revelation of God. The life, the Zoe. In John 6:51, Jesus called himself the bread which gives life. Now he's taking that a step further. He's not just the bread that can give life. He is the life. He is the life. And then at the very end here, let's read the end of chapter 6. Oudes, no one, right? There's an adjective just meaning no one. Oudes, erkatai, proston patera. No one comes to the Father. I me dia emu. Now you're going to know, except not through me. Now you're going to notice that sounds clunky. Wait a minute, that's not what the translation is. Well, that's because there's, in fact, when I hover over it, you notice it says not translated. This little negative participle, me, in the middle of the sentence. You don't often find meh in the middle of a sentence. It's usually at the beginning, like to make a verb negative, right? So why is this here? I think this is an emphasis. This is what an emphatic participle here in the middle of the sentence. And what it's doing is I think it's reinforcing the negative adjective up here at the beginning of the sentence. So you could read it this way. No one comes to the Father not except through me, right? Like, no one comes to the Father except through me. That's the way we say it in English, and it makes sense. But that little meh there in the Greek is reinforcing, no, really, no one can get to the Father, no one, except through Christ. That's just a reinforcing thing. All right, and hey, that is that's the Greek. There you go. Hopefully we learned some things, and we put some things together. I hope you learned something there, even if you don't speak the language and whatnot. Hey, if you were watching this and you do know biblical Greek, first of all, please don't judge my pronunciation. It's a dead language. You don't have to pronounce it perfect. But hey, feel free to, in the comments, leave down some parsings or some things that you found interesting in the Greek there. But yeah, we're going to take, now that we've read the text, we've read the text in the original language, we've exposed ourselves to it plenty. Now we need to start taking these things and we need to make some points. We need to get an outline going. We need to start thinking of some illustrations. We need to start moving into the homiletics side of things and start figuring out how are we going to deliver this to the people. And that might involve looking at some commentaries as well to get some ideas and things like that. So we will talk all about all that in our next video, where we try to make a sermon without using AI. I want to thank you so much for joining me. Hey, I hope you have a great day. Hope you're blessed beyond belief. I'll talk to you later.